My name's Chelsea. When I was 15, I got pregnant. My parents didn't cry. They didn't sit me down. They threw a trash bag of clothes at my feet and told me, "You're not our daughter anymore." I spent the next 2 decades building a life from nothing. And just when I thought the past had stayed buried, they showed up at my door, smiling, demanding to see their grandchild. But the child they think they deserve, the one they believe they abandoned with dignity? Let's just say, I opened the door and gave them an answer they never saw coming. Want to know what I said? Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this? And where from? Drop it in the comments. Now, let me tell you everything they tried to erase. My name is Sarah Delgado. I'm 34 now, living quietly in Dallas, Texas, but every time I smell the warm tang of summer rain on hot pavement, I'm right back to that night in 10th grade. I was 15 then, a shy girl who still believed family meant safety. I stood in our living room clutching a cheap plastic pregnancy test in my trembling hands. It was late, the kind of late when the house usually hummed with silence, but that night the air was sharp, like even the walls were judging me. I had planned to wait until morning, to tell them one at a time. But when the bathroom door creaked and the test clattered into the sink, my mother's eyes met mine. She said nothing at first. Her stare was cold, calculating, like she was looking at a stranger who'd broken into her house. My father walked in, adjusting his gold watch the way he always did before making a decision, big or small. "You're a failure," he said flatly, his voice as measured as a courtroom verdict. "You're no daughter of mine." He didn't raise his voice. That made it worse. Each word dropped like a stone into my chest. He straightened his cufflinks as if he'd just closed a deal, not shattered his child. My mother still hadn't looked directly at me. She reached for the nail file on the coffee table and dragged it lightly over one nail, her tone as sharp as the edge of that file. "You've ruined our name. We don't need this shame." Her words were like a whisper meant to cut deeper than a scream. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I wanted to tell them I was scared, that I didn't know what to do, that I still loved them. Instead, my father's hand reached for the framed family photo on the mantel. He flipped it face down. The click of the frame against wood echoed louder than any slap. That sound told me everything. I had been erased. "You have 10 minutes, he said, his voice clipped. "Get out." 10 minutes. That's all they gave me to stop being their child. I grabbed a small duffel bag, stuffed in clothes without thinking about what matched. On the dresser sat a necklace, a cheap silver chain with a cracked heart pendant I'd gotten at a fair years ago. I clutched it without thinking, the jagged edge pressing into my palm as if it could keep me from floating away. I remember looking back one last time. The living room light glowed yellow against their faces, but they looked like strangers waiting for an elevator, bored and impatient. My father's hand rested on the doorknob, not to hold it open, but to hurry me along. I stepped outside into the Texas night. The humidity clung to my skin, heavy and wet, making it hard to breathe. Behind me, the door clicked shut. That sound, the same sound as the photo frame, locked away not just my childhood bedroom, but the girl I had been. I walked down the driveway with my bag hanging off one shoulder, the necklace twisting between my fingers. Every step felt like a slow shedding of everything I thought I knew about family. There was no one out on our street, just the glow of a distant porch light and the hum of cicadas. I remember thinking, this isn't just a punishment, this is exile. Later, as I sat on the curb at the end of the block, the night pressed in around me. I tried to picture where I could go, who might answer if I called, but all I could feel was the cracked heart pendant digging into my palm. In that moment, something inside me went quiet. Not like surrender, but like a fuse burning low. That was the night I lost my home. More than that, it was the night my family killed the girl I had been and left someone else in her place. Someone I didn't recognize yet. And just when I thought I still had one person left to stand by me, he disappeared too. I kept walking that night, slow and aimless, as if the sidewalk might eventually lead me somewhere other than empty. I didn't cry, not then. My tears felt frozen, like my body knew I'd need to ration them. I ended up near the edge of Zilker Park, the only place that didn't ask questions. I sat on a bench and pulled my knees close, the cracked heart necklace tangled in my fingers. I stared at it like it held answers. Half a heart? The other half? Maybe it never existed. That's when I let myself think about Derek. He was my first love. We met in freshman year, passed notes in class, shared gum in the back row. He had dimples when he smiled, a nervous laugh when teachers caught him looking my way. At prom, he held my hand under the string lights and whispered, "I'll always be there for you." I believed him. When you're 15, words like that feel carved in stone. After my parents turned their backs on me, he was the only person I thought might still care. The next morning, I found a payphone and dialed his number, hands trembling. He answered on the second ring. I could hear a TV in the background, his little brother yelling. Then his voice. "Hey, babe. You okay?" I need to talk to you," I said. "It's important." When I told him, I expected silence. Instead, he was calm. "We'll figure it out," he said. His voice didn't shake. "We'll figure it out, okay?" That line. I played it over and over in my mind. I clung to it like a raft in a storm. For 2 whole days, I believed he meant it. I imagined us sitting in a small apartment, figuring out how to make it work. I even pictured him holding the baby someday, smiling. Then, day 3 came. I called, straight to voicemail. I called again, blocked. I walked to his house, took me nearly an hour on foot, but his dad answered the door. His expression wasn't angry. It was worse. It was cold and corporate, like I was a customer trying to file a complaint. He didn't even let me speak, just handed me an envelope, a letter, from their family attorney. "Miss Delgado, further attempts to contact Derek, last name, will be considered harassment, and legal action will be taken." Legal action. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being erased. Like I was some stain their son had touched, and now they were scrubbing me off. I stood on their front steps holding that envelope, my stomach twisting. No one even bothered to ask if I was okay, or if I had a place to sleep, or food. On the walk back, I didn't cry. I wanted to. But what's the point? No one would see. No one would stop. I passed people in nice clothes, heading into restaurants, laughing with friends. No one looked my way. I made it back to the park. The sun had dipped low, and the wind picked up just enough to make the bench feel colder. I sat back down and pulled my jacket tighter. The necklace, still in my hand, felt heavier somehow. I looked at the little crack in the heart pendant. It hadn't been much to begin with, a fairground prize, but it was all I had. Now, it felt like a joke. Half a heart. Whose half was missing? Not Derek's. He had never truly held it. Maybe I never let myself see that before. That night, I laid back on the bench and stared up at the sky. The stars were there, indifferent and far. I pulled my bag close to my side like it could shield me from the world. This is how lives fall apart, I thought. Not with explosions, not with screaming or glass shattering. Just silence. Just a girl sitting alone on a bench, while the rest of the world moves on. I whispered into the night, barely audible even to myself. One day, they'll regret discarding me. And then, in the middle of that hopeless night, someone unexpected stopped and changed everything. I heard her before I saw her, the soft jingle of a dog's collar, the faint tap of heels on pavement. I stayed curled up, eyes half closed, hoping whoever it was would keep walking. But the dog sniffed at my shoes, then my leg, then let out a little sneeze. "You look too young to be this lost," the voice said. Gentle. Crisp. Not judgmental. Just noticing. I looked up. She was probably in her 70s, her silver hair tucked neatly into a wool hat, a thick plaid scarf wrapped around her neck like a hug. Her coat was tailored, her shoes practical, and her eyes sharp, like she saw through every wall I hadn't meant to build. "I'm fine," I said quickly, sitting up straighter. "Just resting." She said, watching me. She didn't argue, didn't offer a lecture, just lowered herself slowly onto the other end of the bench. "That's a lie," she added after a moment, smoothing her skirt. "But I'll let it slide." I turned my face away. Pride and shame twisted inside me like wires sparking. I didn't want pity. And I sure didn't want to cry in front of some stranger and her fluffy little terrier. Still, she didn't leave. Minutes passed. A car drove by. Somewhere, a sprinkler kicked on. She didn't fill the silence with small talk. She just sat there like she was waiting for me to stop pretending. "My name's Eleanor," she said finally. "And this?" She gestured to the little dog. "Is Marvin. He thinks benches are just fancy dog beds." Despite myself, a small laugh slipped out, more breath than sound. "You hungry?" she asked. I didn't answer. My stomach did. Loudly. "Come have breakfast," she said, standing up. No questions asked. I hesitated. "I don't know you," I muttered. "And I don't know you," she replied. "But my gut says you're more afraid of kindness than you are of cold." She looked down at me. Which is a shame, really. I should have said no. I'd learned fast that kindness usually came with strings, or warnings, but my legs were numb, my fingers stiff, and the ache in my stomach was louder than my doubts. I stood. Her car was parked a few blocks down, an old Lincoln that smelled faintly of lavender and lemon balm. Heated seats warmed my jeans, and I felt the ice start to melt from my spine. I wiped my nose on my sleeve when I thought she wasn't looking. She didn't ask questions. She didn't say, "What happened?" or "Where are your parents?" She just turned on the radio low and drove. Somewhere between one streetlight and the next, I started to cry. Not loud, not sobbing, just tears that rolled without permission. My face stayed still, but my heart cracked wide open. She handed me a tissue from the console and kept her eyes on the road. That silence, it wasn't cold, it was respect. She took me to a boutique hotel on the edge of the city. The building was old but beautiful, with ivy creeping up its stone sides and warm lights in the windows. Inside, the lobby smelled like fresh coffee and polished wood. She handed me a key card. "Room 204, shower's hot, clothes are in the closet, food's on the desk. If you want more, call the front. Just say, guest of Eleanor. That'll do." "Why are you doing this?" I asked. She paused. "Because someone did it for me once. And because you matter, whether you believe it right now or not." I stood frozen for a beat, then took the key. The room had a window that overlooked a quiet courtyard. The shower steamed quickly, and the shampoo smelled like citrus and rosemary. The bed was soft, too soft at first, like it didn't trust me yet. But I sank in, letting the heat wrap around my sore body like a promise. In the morning, she came back with coffee and a bag of warm pastries. She sat at the small round table by the window like she'd done this 100 times. "Eat first," she said, "then we talk." We didn't talk about the baby, or the street, or my parents. Instead, she asked me if I knew how to hold eye contact in a job interview. If I understood what people give away when they fidget, how silence can make people confess more than questions. "You don't win by screaming," she said over her cup. "You win by outlasting. Quiet is stronger than people think." I didn't say much that day, just nodded, listened. Before she left, she handed me a notebook. Write it down, she said. Even if it doesn't make sense. Even if it hurts. One day, your silence will become your strength. I turned the notebook in my hands. Plain cover, lined pages, but it felt like more than paper. She gave me one last look before heading to the door. You're not done, she said. You're just beginning. But even Eleanor couldn't shield me from the storm that came next. It had been almost 10 years since that cold bench in Zilker Park. 10 years of slowly stitching my life back together, thread by trembling thread. Under Eleanor's quiet mentorship, I'd learned more than how to survive. I'd learned how to shape the life I wanted, even if it started from ashes. I started by helping out at her hotel. First folding towels, then organizing guest lists, later shadowing front desk managers. Over time, I absorbed more than just the logistics. I began understanding people, how they move, how they lie, how they break, and sometimes how they heal. Eleanor didn't teach with lectures. She led by showing, by letting me try, fail, try again. You're not made of glass, she'd say when I hesitated. But if you want to shine, you'll have to stand in the light. By the time I turned 25, I was running operations at one of her smaller locations outside Dallas. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. I'd filled that place with order, warmth, and a quiet sense of purpose. Most nights, I'd leave with a small smile and the satisfaction that I'd outlasted a world that once tried to erase me. But even in peace, scars itch. Some nights, I'd wake in a sweat, my father's voice slicing through my sleep like broken glass. You're no daughter of ours. That sentence had followed me for years, on buses, through paperwork, under my breath in the shower. Even now, it still echoed. That evening had started like any other. I was sipping peppermint tea, flipping through a client file, Marvin snoozing by my feet. Yes, the same Marvin, still hanging on after all these years, when a violent knock shattered the quiet. Not a soft tap, not a neighborly knock. It was demanding, like someone trying to own the air I breathed. I stood up slowly, my hand stilling on the desk. The knocks came again, faster, louder. I cracked the door open, chain still latched, and the breath left my lungs. My parents, Geneva and Theron. They looked older, of course, lines etched deeper, skin duller. But their eyes, those eyes hadn't aged a day. Still cold, still full of calculation. "Let us in," my father said flatly, as if this was his house, his door, his right. I stared at them through the gap. My mouth went dry. I hadn't seen them since the night they shoved me into the dark like trash. And now they stood on my porch like guests who'd simply overstayed a vacation. My mother's tone was clipped, as always. "We're here to see our grandchild." Not you. Not how have you been. Not we're sorry. No. We're here to see our grandchild. I didn't move. My fingers curled tight around the edge of the door, knuckles white. "What child?" I asked quietly, evenly. "What are you?" They blinked, like the wind had knocked them back. My father's jaw twitched. "Don't play games." "I'm not," I said. "You gave up the right to answers the night you turned your backs." For a moment, silence hung between us like fog. Then my mother stepped forward, her heel hitting the threshold. "We have rights. She, he, whoever it is, belongs to this family. Legally. Legally. Not lovingly. Not kindly. Legally." I could feel the heat climbing in my chest, but I didn't yell. I wouldn't give them that. I wouldn't give them me. Behind me, Eleanor's voice came gently down the hall. "They're not here for you, sweetheart. They're here for what they think they can take." They looked past me, spotting Eleanor standing tall in her ivory cardigan, calm as a mountain. She didn't flinch. I closed the door halfway, keeping the chain taut. "You want to use me now?" I said. "For a child you never asked about, a child you think exists, a family you never wanted?" My mother narrowed her eyes. "We're doing what's best." "For who?" I asked. Your legacy? Your name? You only show up when there's something to gain. I shut the door. Hard. The sound echoed like a slap. I stood there, breathing hard, hands trembling. Behind me, Eleanor placed a soft hand on my shoulder and said nothing. Later that night, I sat at my desk, journal open, the one she gave me years ago. Its pages were worn, ink-smudged, dog-eared from time. But inside were my words, my pain, my plans, my survival. And now, they were proof. I wrote slowly. They came back. But not for me. Never for me. I closed the book and stared out the window, watching shadows stretch across the floor. And when I thought they couldn't sink lower, they dragged someone else into their scheme, someone from my past. It was a gray afternoon, the kind that makes everything feel heavier. I was closing out invoices in my office at the hotel when the front desk called, "There's a man here asking for you. Says it's important." My stomach tightened. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I stepped into the lobby, my parents were already there, sitting like they owned the place, and beside them stood Darian. For a heartbeat, I thought my mind was playing tricks. His hair was shorter now, streaked with premature gray, his shoulders broader, but the look in his eyes, the same wary, slippery look, hadn't changed. Darian. The boy who once whispered under the stars at prom, "I'll always be there for you." The boy who had promised to figure it out with me when my world collapsed. The boy who vanished when his family's lawyers threatened me. And here he was, standing next to Geneva and Theron, like some rehearsed tableau. "Sarah," he said softly, trying for warmth. We need to talk." I didn't move. My hands stayed at my sides. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples, but my voice came out level. "You've got to be kidding me." Geneva stood, smoothing her skirt. "We're trying to make peace," she said, her tone like a teacher correcting a child. "Everyone makes mistakes. But now, for the child's sake, we deserve a second chance." Her words hit me like a blade. They knew. That child never lived. That loss had been mine alone, a secret I'd carried in silence. And now they used it like a poker chip. "You think this is a game?" I asked quietly. "You're not here to make peace. You're here to rewrite history." Darian stepped closer, palms out like he was the reasonable one. I want to reconnect. I have rights, too." "Rights?" My laugh was short and harsh. "You had rights. You also had a choice, and you chose to disappear." My father spoke for the first time. "Stop being dramatic. We're offering you a chance to make things right. Your silence only makes you look guilty." There it was, the trap. They'd always been good at twisting words until up was down, until refusing them was proof of wrongdoing. For a second, the old reflex flickered in me. Doubt. Maybe they were right. Maybe my silence did make me look guilty. Maybe it would be easier to just let them take what they wanted, to fade out of my own life and let them write the story. I left them standing in the lobby and walked down the corridor to my office, closed the door, leaned against it. My hands were shaking. For the first time in years, I thought about disappearing, not starting over somewhere else, not fighting, just vanishing, letting them win because I was too tired to keep standing. I sat at my desk and picked up the cracked heart pendant from the drawer. Half a heart in my palm, the other half belonging to no one. My vision blurred. The walls felt like they were closing in. Then a knock, gentler this time, at my office door. Eleanor walked in, her eyes sharp but kind. She'd been in the lobby, she'd seen everything. She didn't waste time asking if I was okay. "They're baiting you," she said simply. "If you yield now, they'll write the story of your life in ink, and you'll vanish." Her words cut through the fog, not with anger, with clarity. I breathed out, long and slow. The pendant sat in my palm, cool and heavy. I reached for the journal she'd given me years ago, its pages filled with pain turned into plans. I opened to a blank page and wrote, "They erased me once. Never again." Outside, I could still hear their voices echoing faintly down the hall, but inside, something shifted. Not relief, not victory, but a line drawn. But instead of retreating, I chose to fight. And my first move was silence. That night, I turned off my phone, not just silencing the ringer, but powering it down completely. I stacked the letters they had sent, thick envelopes stuffed with guilt, in a shoebox and taped it shut. Every package that showed up at my door, I sent right back. No note, no reaction, just rejection wrapped in bubble wrap. It wasn't about pride, it was survival. Every word they threw at me was laced with the same poison, control disguised as concern. At first, they mistook my silence for shock, then for hesitation, and finally, for arrogance. Geneva, who never once asked if I was warm or fed during my darkest nights, suddenly found her voice online. She posted family photos from a decade ago, captions drenched in syrupy grief. "Not a day goes by I don't miss my little girl. We just want to be a family again." Comments poured in. Sympathy from strangers who didn't know a damn thing about abandonment. One even wrote, "How could a daughter turn her back on such loving parents?" I stared at that comment for a full minute, then laughed out loud. A short, bitter laugh that tasted like rust. Theron, meanwhile, left voicemails, one after another. His voice grew sharper each time. "Selfish," he barked into the recorder. "Ungrateful. You think you're too good for the people who raised you? We made you. Don't forget that." I didn't respond. Not once. And that, more than any angry words, drove them mad. Darian cracked first. He sent me an email late at night, probably thinking I wouldn't see it. But of course, I did. And so did Eleanor's legal contact, who was quietly tracking everything behind the scenes. In the email, Darian wrote, "They promised me something for doing this. I didn't agree to all this drama. I just wanted to clean things up." Then another email surfaced, this one between him and Geneva. "I deserve my cut, Geneva. Don't act like this was just about your daughter. You knew what you were doing." They weren't trying to make peace. They were negotiating payouts. I didn't need to scream it from rooftops. The receipts did the talking. Eleanor and I met one morning over coffee in her usual spot by the window. She had already seen the emails. She slid a folder toward me. "They're falling apart on their own," she said. "All you have to do is let them." I nodded, but my jaw was clenched. There was a fire in my chest. Not rage, not sadness. It was something heavier. The weight of history trying to pull me back under. Later that afternoon, I made one phone call. Just one. When Geneva picked up, I let my voice tremble. Just a little. "Why now?" I asked, quiet, as though I was unraveling. "Why are you doing this? After all these years?" I heard her breath catch. She launched into a rehearsed monologue about forgiveness, family, the child. But the longer she talked, the more her words tangled. She was too eager, too defensive. It wasn't love. It was hunger. I hung up without a word. That night, I flipped open my journal. Eleanor had written something inside the front cover years ago, something I had underlined back then and now circled in thick black ink. "Their noise is your shield." Silence had once been forced on me. Now I chose it, and it was louder than anything they could scream. The more they pushed, the more absurd they looked. Parents who had tossed me out like trash now demanding their rights. A man who vanished when I needed him most now calling himself a father. I started to wonder, how many people out there were told to forgive someone who had never said sorry? How many were pressured to accept a version of reality that denied their pain? My inbox filled with legal threats. I didn't flinch. I kept working. Kept showing up, kept breathing. And when I thought their hunger had peaked, They struck harder, dragging me into a courtroom. The envelope was thick, heavy, like it already knew it carried damage. When I opened it and saw the words, "Petition for Grandparent Visitation," my hands went cold. I read the lines twice, thinking maybe I'd misunderstood. But there it was, in black and white. Geneva and Theron Foster were suing me for visitation rights to a child who no longer existed. They didn't care. Not about truth, not about grief. This wasn't about connection. It was about control. And this time, they were trying to wear the mask of love while sharpening their knives behind their backs. Eleanor sat beside me as we waited for the first hearing. She didn't say much, just kept her palm resting lightly over mine. Her presence was the only warmth in that cold, echoing courtroom. My parents were already seated when I walked in, dressed in carefully curated humility, Geneva in a muted gray dress, a tissue pressed to her lips, Theron in a navy blazer and solemn frown. Darian sat behind them, face clean-shaven, tie straight. I felt a jolt in my chest that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear. It was recognition of the script they were about to perform. And I knew it better than anyone. The judge called the case, and we stood. Their lawyer, a man with a voice like molasses and eyes like steel, opened with a line that almost made me laugh. "This is a case about reconciliation and the rights of family." Geneva took the stand first. She dabbed at her eyes, her voice trembling in just the right places. "We've made mistakes. We admit that," she said. "But no one's perfect. We lost our daughter once, and now we just want the chance to know our grandchild, to bring love into that child's life." There were soft murmurs in the room. Some people nodded. Some looked toward me as if I were the villain in this twisted tale. Then it was Theron's turn. He didn't cry. He didn't plead. He painted me as unstable, selfish, manipulative. "She shut us out," he said. "No explanation. Just silence. We have rights. That child is our blood." My breath caught. Then Darian stepped up, hand on the Bible, voice steady. "I tried. Back then, I tried. But she wouldn't let me. I wanted to be there. For her. For the baby." She pushed everyone away. Every sentence felt like a punch, and I couldn't flinch, couldn't show the sting. I knew they wanted a reaction, anything they could spin. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't walk up with papers or prepared remarks. I carried only two things: my cracked pendant and the journal Eleanor gave me years ago. I looked the judge straight in the eye. "They abandoned me," I said. "Not once, not by accident, but with intention." I held up the heart pendant. This was the only piece of comfort I had the night they locked the door and told me I was no longer their daughter. The room was quiet. Then I opened the journal to a marked page. This is where I wrote down everything they did after that night. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed to remember who I was when everyone else tried to erase me. I paused, then added, calm but sharp. "There is no grandchild. There is no family bond. There is only this performance, because they see value in what they discarded." Their lawyer stood, objecting to the emotional manipulation. The judge allowed it, but the room shifted. Then, as the judge prepared to close the hearing, Eleanor's lawyer stood and requested permission to submit an additional document, one I had kept hidden until that moment. It was signed, dated, and notarized. A release of all parental rights. Geneva and Theron's signatures right there. Years ago, they had legally severed themselves from me. Now they wanted back in, without apology, without accountability. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. But inside, I felt something settle. Not peace, not victory, just truth, laid bare. As we left the courtroom, I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see their faces, but their arrogance blinded them and gave me the opening I needed. 3 months later, the stage was bigger than any courtroom. The Austin Tech Summit filled an entire convention center with media crews, business leaders, and investors, shoulder to shoulder in neatly pressed suits and sleek dresses. Bright lights buzzed overhead, the air electric with anticipation. It wasn't my spotlight, it was Austin's. My son, who had built something brilliant out of the ashes I once lived in. I stood backstage, heart steady, eyes watching. And there they were, my parents and Darian, sitting in the front row like royalty in exile, dressed to impress, faces tight with confidence. They thought this was their redemption arc. They thought his success would rewrite their names back into our lives. But this wasn't their story. Austin stepped onto the stage, tall, composed, more man than boy now. He didn't look my way, but I saw the echo of Eleanor in the way he held the microphone, chin lifted. His first words cut through the room like clean glass. "Family is who stands by you," he said. "Not who abandons you." A ripple ran through the audience. People turned. My parents stiffened. Behind Austin, the giant screen flickered to life. A video began to play. The image was grainy but sharp enough to recognize the face. Eleanor, filmed just months before she passed. She sat in her garden, hair silver against the sun, voice calm and unflinching. "Cowards discard family," she said. "They only return when there's something to steal." The silence in the room wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Geneva's fingers froze on the hem of her sleeve. Theron blinked, once, then again, as if unsure whether to stand or sit. Darian fidgeted with his watch. Then came the legal blow. Sean, my attorney, took the podium next. With a few clicks, he projected the document, familiar to me by now, but new to the crowd. Geneva and Theron's signed release of parental rights. Their signatures bold, undeniable. "There is no legal bond between these individuals and Ms. Norton," Sean stated evenly, "and there hasn't been for years." Flashbulbs lit up the room, the tension turned dense, but we weren't finished. The screen changed again. This time, emails, dozens of them, dates, times, IP traces, all authenticated. Darian's demands for money, Geneva's chilling words, "Her weakness is guilt. We'll break her." Theron's complaints about being cut out of legacy wealth. The rot was now in full view. Gasps. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others whispered to each other, disbelief crawling across their faces. I stepped out then, quietly. No announcement. No theatrics. "I hear a lot about family from these people," I said, facing the room, but locking eyes with no one in particular. "But let's be clear, they demanded my child when I no longer had one. They said they were owed something. What they never admitted was this. They were the reason I lost that pregnancy in the first place." Geneva's lips parted, but no words came. I held up the pendant. "This is all I had when they left me alone and pregnant, too scared to breathe." Then I looked at Austin, who stood quietly to the side, watching me with the calm of someone who already knew the truth. "He's not your blood," I said flatly, turning back to the audience. "He's not your legacy. You don't get to claim what you broke." Security approached from both sides of the aisle. The audience parted as if the room itself had rejected them. Geneva stood, still composed on the outside, but her face drained of color. Theron didn't resist, but his jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscles twitching. Darian, he tried to speak, but the microphones weren't his anymore. The audience didn't clap, they didn't cheer, they didn't need to. The silence was louder than any standing ovation. It was judgment. It was clarity. It was justice, not from a judge's bench, but from the eyes of hundreds who now saw them for what they were. As they were escorted out, I didn't follow them with my eyes, because I already knew this wasn't their ending. It was only the beginning. In the days that followed the summit, the internet did what it always does. It exploded. News outlets clipped the footage of my parents being escorted out, and within hours, hashtags like #FamilyGreedExposed and #NotYourLegacy were trending. People were dissecting every frame, every flinch, every fake tear Geneva had tried to sell. The mask had fallen, and this time, the world was watching. Their company took the first hit. 3 clients pulled out in a single day. By the end of the week, their office sat quiet and hollow. Employees left. Board members turned their backs. Their polished website went offline, and their social media accounts were either locked or flooded with comments demanding answers. Then came the sale notice. Their Austin home, once a status symbol, was listed far below market value, the listing scrubbed clean of any mention of its former owners. A few photos of moving trucks circulated online, but I didn't look too closely. The home didn't matter. The weight of their consequences did. Darian didn't fare much better. A whistleblower tipped off the IRS, and suddenly his clean suits and arrogant grin were no match for financial audits and subpoenas. His name disappeared from the companies he'd once flaunted. A few of his old friends even issued public statements distancing themselves. The spotlight he craved was now an interrogation lamp. I didn't gloat. I didn't post. I didn't speak. I just watched from a distance as the truth settled into place, not with a scream, but with silence. The justice I had begged for 24 years ago had finally arrived, not in a courtroom, but in consequence. One afternoon, while Austin was at class, I sat at my desk and opened the old journal. The paper had softened with time, but the ink on the first page was still sharp. They erased me once, never again. I read it aloud, then turned to the very last page and wrote, "I am not erased. I endured. I rebuilt." The foundation's opening came 2 months later, on a crisp fall morning that smelled of cedar and clean air. We named it after the woman who had shown me how to survive, the Kayla Rhodes Foundation. We took in young women who had been pushed out, turned away, silenced. Girls who were told they had nothing left. Girls like I had been. During the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I stood at the entrance, watching as a teenage mother stepped timidly through the door. Her baby was no more than a month old, swaddled in a faded pink blanket. She clutched a worn duffel bag and tried not to meet anyone's gaze. I saw myself in her, raw, afraid, but not broken. Austin stood beside me, taller than ever, shoulders strong. He smiled at the girl, then quietly stepped aside to give her space. I reached into my purse, pulled out the cracked pendant, and walked over to the front display case. It sat empty, waiting. I placed the pendant inside. It didn't feel like a wound anymore. It felt like a story told, a chapter closed, a symbol of survival that belonged to the foundation now, to all who walked through those doors, searching for a second chance. Later that evening, we hosted a small gathering with supporters and friends. I was asked to say a few words. I hadn't planned to, but when I looked around that room, at women who had fought their way back to life, at my son who had become a man of purpose, I felt ready. Family, I said, is not who breaks you. It's who stays when the storm comes. It's who stands beside you when you have nothing left to offer but the truth. They clapped gently, not out of celebration, but understanding. I didn't need revenge, not anymore. I had peace. I had purpose. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living so fully that those who tried to erase you fade into their own shadows.